Welcome to another edition of Unplugged. We're at the point where there are 4 games left in the home and away season. Of course, as Saints fans, we hope, and it's still alive, that there is a possibility that there might be more than 4 games left upon the season. Remarkably, again, after consecutive losses, we face the prospect that if we win Friday night's game, we will enter the top 8. We cannot end the round in the 8 because I believe Richmond and Fremantle play each other. So one of them you would think would probably get a result in that particular game, unless it, of course, was a draw. But obviously, first things first, we've got to get the job done. We come off a narrow loss to West Coast. Those are always disappointing, but it was a loss that didn't hurt as much as some of those in previous weeks against notably Port Adelaide or the Crows. We did see the emergence further of Max King. We saw a return to form of the man that we put the microscope on last week in Dan Butler. We saw strong performances from a number of players. And had Rowan Marshall not have gone to the precinct for a beer, you sense we probably would have got the job done in that game. But we are still alive, albeit with work to do. 8-point loss to the West Coast Eagles. We're still yet to win a game at Optus Stadium, but we've lost 3 of the 4 matches we played there by less than 2 goals. Nick, your summation of that. It was a game that we never really looked like winning until there was about 2.5 minutes to go. And I remember texting a couple of people when we got within 7 points, thinking, bugger, this has turned into a painful loss when it never looked like being that.
Yeah, it's one of those weird ones, isn't it? Because you look back at it and think, geez, it was really winnable in the end. But, I mean, you look at the fact that we're sitting here, before round 19, I think it is, I get confused at the end of the year, round 19, and somehow we're still a shot at playing finals footy. And someone asked me during the week or earlier in the week to write an article about which team is going to be the one that breaks through and finally sews up that final spot. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because it's too hard to work out which of those teams, like us, that keeps bottling opportunities when given a shot. Each of these teams, whether it's us or Carlton or Essendon or GWS even, all you get a shot and you get winnable games that are going to, cement you a spot in the 8 or get you back into the 8 in our situation, and you just bottle those opportunities. And again, we had opportunities on the weekend and couldn't quite get it done. It was not a bad performance in the end. The loss was a painful loss because, like you said, we probably could have won in the end. But I think it was good. We fought it out to the very end. There were times during that third and even the start of the last quarter where I thought they were going to run away with it in the end, and we were potentially going to put the cue in the rack and give up, and we didn't. And that was really promising. And I think all in all, it was a positive performance. Certainly not our best performance by any stretch, but there were a lot of positives to come out of it. And you mentioned Butler before, and I'm sure we'll touch on him. But we were pretty harsh on him last week, and I still think rightly so. But his best game of the year, Max King, obviously his best game of the year, likes playing against the Eagles. Had a pretty good game against them earlier in the year, and they're a pretty decent back line. Got a couple of All-Australian defenders in that defence. So we lost the game, but there were a lot of positives to come out of it, and I think we head into this week feeling, if not confident of a win, at least confident that we can take it up and we can really give this a good shake still.
H, what did you make of it? It was one where we probably sit there and think. I mean, at half time we were staring at a belting. It didn't come, and it's probably fair to say that last 7 minutes of the second quarter cost us the game.
Well, you sort of look at stages of the game and you think, well, we played better football in some patches than what we did the week before.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just one of those weird matches. I mean, we can't blame bad kicking. We can't blame
Umpiring.
We didn't turn the ball over as much as what we did the week before. It was just one of those weird ones where the opposition we played was just better. And they were just better all game. And as you're saying, until we got to the last few minutes of the match, you're sort of thinking, oh, here we go. We're a shot here. But they just found that answer every time. They were able just to find that answer in goal when we pull within that goal towards the end, and they just had the answer all night basically. So it was there for the taking, but yeah, they were just on the game that night to keep us out of it, just to hold
And
us at arm's length. So,
that's the thing that good teams do, and this hasn't been West Coast's best year, but when push came to shove in that game, it was Tim Kelly at the end of the second quarter and his kind of, like you said, 7-minute patch or 10-minute patch that kind of broke the game open for them, and then at the end of the game it was Dom Sheed, in those last few minutes that really put the pressure on and came to the fore and was the difference, and we just haven't had for all Jack Steele's incredible feats and efforts and whatever this year, he can't do it on his own. And we just haven't had enough of those guys stand up in those moments, in those moments, in those games that we needed to win. We just haven't had, enough of those guys to have those moments.
Yeah, we had a dominant key forward, one of the more dominant key forward games of the year by a player. I think he was too short. Max King of the record contested marks in a game with 80s, kicked 6. Basically kicked 6 straight. He missed one very early, which was sort of a half pass, half shot, and kicked one that didn't quite make the distance in the last quarter, but had all of that working. So he had a dominant key forward. I thought our defence was slightly off. I think they've been pretty resilient for a couple of months, but Howard, for example, just lowered his colours just when we didn't need him to, I guess. Some of our midfielders that have been really good form, like Crouch, like Steele, like Dunstan, were just a little bit quieter than they've been in other matches, and West Coast had at key stages guys like Sheed and Kelly, and it was just a couple of little things. I mean, Zach Jones played a great game. Ryder did pretty well in the ruck. Clearly, the game of Max King was a standout, but we just probably didn't quite have enough. It was a funny one. We didn't. I would say against Port Adelaide, we might have had more contributors. But in this game, we had more standout performers, and everybody was okay. There were less mistakes. It just didn't quite amount to enough to get us home. So, and that was frustrating. And look, Paul Hunter wasn't disgraced. I thought that was better than maybe he'd been earlier in the year. But just a couple of key stages. Obviously, he was able to kick a goal, but around the ground, Nat Nui, when he got that front and centre where he kicked the goal, and obviously the late one where Darling took that mark. They were just a couple of moments, and I said it didn't hurt as much as other games. It's just the way it is. But yeah, you kind of feel that if a couple of players had have just played sort of at the level that they had for the previous 3 or 4 weeks, it would have been enough.
That's just they held a few of the players that, as we say, in Steele digs in every week. They held him quite well. I mean, his job was probably a little bit different on the weekend. I think he probably had to chase a few more players than what he does normally. For what has done this so far this season, he's probably had a little bit more of a tagging job to sort of stop them a bit more. But he didn't have the impact. He didn't have just that leading position that he's had every other week, and you sort of go, okay, that stepped down. Jones stepped up a bit in that place. But then we had Crouch drop back off what he's had for the last month or so, because the last month he's played has been great, but he drops off. Then I guess Hill's stepped up recently. He's played some pretty good football. He played pretty well again on the weekend. So it's just getting them all in those key games that we need to win, all playing good football on the same day. But it's other games we've had earlier in the year where if Steele's dropped off, we haven't had that other player come and step up and play the better football where he hasn't. So it's, as I was saying, it's not one of those games where we look back like against Richmond and go, oh, we were terrible and we lost, etc., etc. We played good football. We played the game that was being played on that day. It just wasn't good enough in the end. But there wasn't really anything you go, that was really bad. That wasn't good enough. That wasn't. It just didn't feel like the match was just going to go our way. It was just it was there, but it just wasn't.
Yeah, you mentioned the defense earlier, and I think outside of probably the Essendon game and the Bulldogs game, where you can't really blame the defense for those losses, but I think this was probably the defensive unit's probably worst game of the year. And not to say they were bad, but they've been outstanding all year. And they just probably lowered their colours a little bit. Like you said, Jack Steele lowered his colours. not that he was bad.
Yeah, still
You
had
know,
13
he had 13
tackles.
tackles, exactly 13 tackles, still had 5 or 6 clearances, I think it was, and still, 20 plus touches. And so it's not that he was bad, but he wasn't the outstanding Jack Steele that we've come to expect.
And his opponent did a little bit of damage, yeah.
That's right. And you normally expect, an average Jack Steele game is a game where he gets 25 touches, kicks a goal, and his opponent is pretty much neutralised. And in this game, he had his 20 touches, 13 tackles, but Tim Kelly had a real impact and was able to impact on the scoreboard, was able to impact on the game and make a real difference, which is something that we're not used to seeing out of, the guy that Jack Steele plays on. And, Crouch was his worst game for the year. And I think he probably hasn't had a game like that most of his career. It was probably one of the worst games of his career. He's a really consistently strong performer. And, like you said, whether it's one of those guys, having their standard game from the last 4 or 6 weeks, or whether it's Ryan Marshall coming in, that's probably the difference. That's probably the difference that gets us over the line in the end in those final few minutes. But for a number of small reasons, like you said, H, we just weren't good enough on the day, and they were just that bit better when it counted.
Yeah, that's the funny one, because it doesn't, as I said, we know what it's like over the last 2 years to have losses that really hurt. This was one that had consequence. Like, if we win the game, we're a massive chance to play finals. You lose it and it hurts your chances, but it wasn't as painful as those losses. For whatever reason, it's hard to explain why that was the case. But it just didn't, I don't know, it didn't rip the heart out of the chest like some of the other ones have done.
Yeah, and I think that's because you could see the energy and the effort. They really put in, and it wasn't, like you said, we didn't lose because we were bad.
Per se. Yeah.
That's right. There were no real, I don't think there were any passengers on the day. They all kind of gave really good effort. The energy was good. It's a big ground. We know that. We know it takes, more than the average effort to get around that ground and compete at every contest, and they did that. But they were just that, the Eagles were just that little bit better, and you can't, you can't hold blokes accountable for things that they didn't give when they gave it. They gave the effort and they did everything asked of them, and we were just weren't good enough on the night. But I guess it's probably time that we touched on Dan Butler, because we were harsh on the bloke last week, and like I said at the top, I think that was necessary. I don't think we said anything out of turn. A few people have kind of come on the socials during the week or over the weekend and said that maybe we were too harsh, and there's a few statistics and whatever that kind of suggest that maybe we were a little bit harsh. But I guess from my perspective, and I've put this out there a few times over the journey, but when we talk about players being poor or poorer than expectation, I don't like to compare them against other players. I like to compare them against themselves. And for a guy like Dan Butler, we saw what Dan Butler's capable of. We know what he's capable of, and nowhere ever have I ever suggested that Dan Butler's not a good player. He's a very good player, and he showed us what he's capable of. He's put up some decent effort numbers this year in terms of, someone mentioned that he was ranked elite for pressure acts in the league, or he was a top player for tackles inside 50, had 1.5 tackles inside 50 a game. Last year, when he had his kind of breakout year, he was second in the league for pressure acts. He was averaging 2 tackles inside 50 a game in 25 or 30% less game time. So I'm not saying that he's a bad player, but I'm saying that up to expectation, he clearly hasn't performed. And when you look at what a guy can bring to the team, he hasn't brought that to the team. He hasn't brought the energy that he brought last year in shorter game time. He hasn't brought the output that he brought to the team in shorter game time last year. And I think, we talk all the time about holding guys accountable and making sure that they give that effort and they give that energy every week, contest after contest after contest. And I don't think he's done that. This was his best game for the year by a long, long margin. And I hope that he keeps that up, because he makes such a big difference when he's on. When he's on, he makes a huge difference to the way that we play and the way that we structure and our forward 50. I'm sure he makes life easier for Max King and Tim Embry and those guys inside 50 as well, because he makes space for them.
Yeah, I think certainly, over the second half of the year, his pressure rating had been good, but his impact with the ball was non-existent, which is equally as important to the role that he plays in that side. And, for my main issue with him was the lairising and the low percentage options when you're out of form and when the side needs things. And on Saturday, that's the most possessions he's ever had in a game. But also what I did like was there were periods where he ran and carried, took 2 or 3 bounces, didn't like what was in front of him, stopped, turned around and fed the ball to a player in a better position rather than just going, oh, well, I can't see anything there, so I'll kick a 45-metre banana into the corridor and hopefully someone marks it, or I'll handball it over my head or anything like that. He actually, our first goal of the second half, we took 3 bounces, ran into about 3 or 4 players and thought, well, I can't do anything here. So he fed it back to Billings. Billings kicked it to King. King took a mark and kicked a goal. And I'm like, well, that's the percentage play. And the second,
just before you get onto that next one of the things that I think was most impressive from Butler in that play was after he gave it to Billings and he kind of stopped props, took a few steps back, gave himself some space, fed Billings. Billings kicks long to King. As Billings kind of takes that kick and goes forward, Dan Butler actually ran backwards to fill up space in defence. He filled a gap in defence, which previously he hasn't done. And it's these little things that, like you said, it's not the Hollywood handball over the shoulder. It's not the waiting at the back of the pack. It's doing the team thing. And like you said, the last few weeks he has been better at that, but there's been clear, I guess, breaches of that accountability. And it was a very good game from Dan Butler on the weekend. H, how did you see him?
Yeah, well, I was going to say one thing a lot of people I think have kind of forgotten was the fact that he was in the All-Australian squad last year. He was in that best 40 players in the league. That is a lot to live up to, and I think basically what everyone's been saying is he hasn't even got close to doing the same thing this year. He wouldn't even be in consideration this year. That's
wouldn't be in the
where
second
you're sort of looking going. We know
our team.
Yeah, the league knows. The experts know what he can do. We know what he can do, but we just have not seen any of that this year. And until the game just gone, we look at that at what he did against West Coast and go, that's what we've been asking for. That's as simple as it is. Those smart decisions, those just doing the simple things. We've seen moments during the year, like the pressurising the mark a few weeks back. That is great. Chasing down a ridge down. That was great football. But there was other things that night you go, that was just dumb. So it's just getting that balance of many more better things during a game than errors or wrong decisions or mistakes but getting the right decisions when it comes up. The handballing it over to Hill the other way, over to Brad Hill to run into an open goal. Just those few little bits and pieces that will bring him back to that point that he was at last year again.
Yeah, we need him. I mean, obviously Loney's lost form and Higgins has been in and out of the side. But if we're going to be fair dinkum, then we obviously need him to get back to that level. And look, it worked last week. Our Shannon Knoll worked, so we might each do one this week. So I might give you some time to think about that. We'll do the 3-2-1 and the Shannon Knoll for the week. But I'll start whilst you think on that. I'll go honourable mentions to Brad Hill, who's in pretty good form. Also honourable mentions to a couple of others that were, pretty serviceable on the day, including Dan Butler. But I gave one vote to Jack Sinclair for his ball use and consistency over the course of the game. I gave 2 votes to Zach Jones, who was our best midfielder on the ground quite comfortably. And 3 votes definitely to Max King, played one of the games of the year. So obviously we hope that he can push that on now and continue that forward. And my Shannon Knoll is Tim Membry this week. I think he's had a pretty good year, but the last 2 weeks he's battled a little bit. I think a couple of times inside 50 against Port Adelaide. He made a couple of errors and just didn't quite have the impact you would have hoped against West Coast. I think he had 10 or 11 possessions, took 4 marks. I mean, he was getting 18 to 20 touches and taking 9 or 10 marks a game and kicking a couple of goals a week. And he's not out of form necessarily, but he's had a couple of quiet games and he could be the difference in, some of these key games that we have to win over the next month. So I think we just need Tim Membry to recapture a bit of that spark, H.
I thought about Tim, and then I sort of thought someone we've seen improve over the last 3-4 weeks as well has been Ben Long. He went a bit missing on the weekend, so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'd like to see him along with Butler up forward, both showing us that great football we know they can play, because he found his spot up forward, and
Yeah, he has.
if he could do what he did for those couple of weeks in a row for the last 4 weeks of the season, we're right in amongst it.
Achieved the
If he's up
extraordinary
there.
feat of missing a goal from the goal line. But anyway.
The
I
number
just
of goals
yeah,
that St Kilda players have missed from incredibly
a goal
close,
line.
like, you know, we've seen Tim Embry hit the post running into an open goal. We've
Josh
seen
Bruce.
Josh Bruce hit from the top of the goal square, and now Ben Long from the goal line. Like, it's just insane.
That was almost off the heel. It was that far off the side of the boot. It was.
He almost didn't know. He almost didn't know whether he was trying to kick it across goal or kick it through the goals. He seemed very indecisive in that moment. Like, the fact that he kicked it on that angle, the way that he did across the goal line, was bizarre. It just seemed like he was caught in two minds about what he was going to do. But amazing.
Yeah,
keeps happening.
But anyway,
from that.
Yeah. But anyway, I found Darren didn't give him one, but I found one vote for Butler. I think just finding that form, just if you can find that form and you can show that and you put in that game, you say it was his best statistical game that he's had in his career. Kicked 2 goals, kept us in the game. Give us a few of that for the rest of the season, and you're going to be back where we want you. And what we were saying last week, it was third in our voting last year, so that's his first vote for the season, and it would be nice to see him finish off with a few more. I go 2 to Zach Jones. Great game. Gave us everything he could. Obviously, a couple of the other senior players, he didn't get as much backup from him as much as usual, so he dug in and gave us everything he could. And Max, 6 goals, 1. Play West Coast every week. That'd be great. He's the one of the defences that gets talked up about being so stubborn and so pick everything off, and he was just making it look easy against them a little bit. So the ball stuck to his hands. We've been waiting for it just to stick like that. The dropping them for a while there, he was marking them like that on the wing, and then go down the forward line and drop it. Exactly the same sort of mark, and you think, oh, why can't you take those marks that you are on the wing down the forward? And that's exactly what he did on the weekend. They stuck, and no roof, and he kicked straight.
I kind of toed and froed about my Shannon Knoll. I thought about Brad Crouch, and I thought everyone kind of gets a free pass, and this is kind of his free pass. I think he's been amazing pretty much all year since he came back into the team from his suspension in round 2. I think it took him a couple of weeks to kind of understand how our midfield worked in game, but since then he's been incredible. So I'm giving him a pass this week. But there are a few guys. I thought about Dougal Howard potentially, but I also landed on Tim Embry only because I respect what he brings to this squad every week so much, and his leadership at times this year has almost been, Jack Steele level. His leadership this year in moments, pulling himself down back, taking intercept marks, contested marks, in defensive 50, slowing the game down. He brings an element of leadership and of football IQ or football understanding, I think, that no one else really in our squad brings. And it was that. I mean, he wasn't poor. He wasn't poor on the weekend, but he just didn't show that same level. And for me, I think that was something that we really could have used in some of those key moments, in the second half of the second quarter, and then a bit through that third quarter and early in the last quarter. I really could have used a stepping up of leadership. And I think that was kind of the difference maker for me, for Embry. I love what Tim Embry brings. He's one of my first picked every week. And that was the one letdown, I thought, because he's had a really good year in that regard. But H, he said he hasn't got a vote all year until your one vote. I agree. I gave him one vote. 20 touches, 4 clearances, 11 score involvements, and 2 goals. Was almost the perfect kind of small forward, half forward, defensive forward type game. And like I said, his work rate was the best I've seen all year. It was a perfect team game from a small forward, and was really impressed with Dan Butler. And credit where it's due, he was in our top few players. I've got honourable mentions. I must say it's unusual to have Jack Steele in honourable mentions, but he was good. He just wasn't great, and he wasn't Jack Steele level great. So he's in honourable mentions. Brad Hill, Jack Sinclair, and Cal Wilkie I thought was very solid. On a day where our defence, like we spoke about earlier, probably lowered their colours, Cal Wilkie still had, I think it was 10 intercepts or 9 intercepts or something like that, and stepped up. We lost Tom Highmore before the game as well, and I thought he was one of the bright spots in that defensive effort. But Zach Jones, 2 votes, 32 touches, 600 metres gained, 7 clearances, 8 inside 50s, 7 score involvements, was probably our most consistent player throughout the entire game. Just never stopped running, never stopped working. Was our best midfielder, and had the most impact, I think, of all players in the middle of the ground. But you can't go past Max King, and that was, we've been talking for a while about when was he going to get that breakout game, that game that he kind of took over the entire 4 quarters. And he had a good game against the Eagles early in the year. He had a decent game against Richmond, but this was his breakout. This was him showing the rest of the league and putting those other guys on notice, putting defenses on notice that this guy is going to tear the league apart for the next decade. Stop talking about Harry McKay. Stop talking about Ben King. This can be Max King's league if he wants it, and he showed on the weekend that he wants it. 11 contested possessions, 9 marks, 8 of them contested, and 6 goals won. It was an amazing game, and he very nearly got us over the line.
Yeah, he's played 4 blinders this year. He just didn't kick straight in one of them, and it ended up being a horror show against Geelong where he took 11 marks. But the 2 West Coast games, the Brisbane game where he swung the game on its head in the third quarter playing on Harris Andrews, where he took 10 marks and most of them on him. I thought special mention too, he didn't play a blinder, but I thought it was the most comfortably looked at. And Claverino got a bit of the ball. Thought he was solid enough. He'll probably lose his spot this week, but I thought he was okay. We'll get to that game in a moment, but our special guest kicked a very special goal, amongst other things he did in his career, of course, and that is Troy Schwarze.
It was 5 points last year. It's 5 points at the moment, the other way round. Now the ball's loose. It gives St Kilda a rough chance. Black. Good hand pass. Voss. Schwarze now. The defender can run. And from a long way. Roost it. And put the Saints in front. Aussie Jones says settle things down. It's the Saints by a point. We've almost ticked over 34 minutes. Play on now. Back to White.
Well, on this week's edition of Unplugged, we check in with Troy Schwarze, who played 71 games for the Saints between his arrival at the club in 1999 and the end of 2006. Played some terrific footy for the club, obviously noted for a particularly memorable moment that sticks in all of our minds from the clash with the Brisbane Lions in 2004 at what was then, I believe, Telstra Dome. In a huge contest during a period of great rivalry between those two sides, and went on to play some fine footy that year and over the coming years as well. Now applying his trade in the real estate game, having done a fair bit of coaching in local footy. Troy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, boys. It's an honour to be on the show. I'm not one of the biggest names to have played for the club, but And I was certainly happy when you had Michael Klim on last week that I was happy to move myself around. You got to know your place, as some of my coaches used to tell me.
Now, being a December birthday, so we'll go back to the start of the journey. So you're obviously being born late in the year. Your draft eligibility makes you one of the youngest players. And as I understand it, at the time of being recruited to the Saints, you were the youngest player on any list in the AFL. Can you sort of take us through what it was like going there? Because at the end of 98, they just sacked Stan Alves. They just appointed Tim Watson. So it was a little bit of a strange time, I guess, to be arriving at a club.
Yeah, I sort of didn't know any different in terms of what it was like when I arrived. And certainly there wasn't a lot of mention of Stan, even though they'd had a really successful period and probably should have won a flag in 97 and probably had the best team really out of any era that you've seen in recent times, barring maybe 29, 2010. The 97, 98 teams were bloody good teams. But, I got there as a 16-year-old, so I finished year 11, and I was actually on holidays with my parents, and a draft note got sent to home in the mail. I think back then emails were a little bit foreign for people. So, so a letter arrived in the mail, and we were in Queensland on an annual holiday that we do up to Queensland each year. And I think the neighbour was getting our mail, and the neighbour called us and said, it was a letter from the AFL for Troy. And we got him to open it. It said, you've been invited to the draft camp, but we'd missed the cutoff date to respond. So I was pretty frantic that I didn't think I was going to get drafted anyway, but I wanted the opportunity. So, we quickly made some phone calls and got myself on the list of the draft camp and went and did the draft camp at, it was in Waverley. I think it was a police force. It was the academy, I think police academy. And that was a pretty grueling couple of days that we just got smashed out there. And Mark Williams from Port Adelaide was really interested in me, and I still thought nothing of it. And then St Kilda hadn't even spoken to me. And then draft day, they called my name out. So it was a big shock.
What was that draft day experience like in those times? We've spoken to a few different types of players, some from kind of before draft and some since then. But what was that day like for you?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. So we were at home and we had a pretty humble house in Dingley, which wasn't far from Moorabbin. So St Kilda was probably, of all the clubs to go to, it was the most convenient because I was 16. I wasn't going to get my licence for another year and a bit. So it was handy to go there. But I was sitting on the couch. I remember sitting on the couch at home. Mum was sitting next to me. I've got two brothers, and they're both younger. They were at the back playing table tennis with my dad, and my name got read out, and Mum just started screaming. And I sat there in shock, really, that my name had even been read out because I really hadn't thought a lot about it. And I'd only played 8 games in the TAC that year, and I played the last 8 games for Paran Dragons, as it was then, and played pretty well in the finals in a couple of games in the MCG, and still didn't really think much of it because I missed out on the list originally at Dragons. So to get drafted in the same year was pretty ridiculous when you look back. But mate, the phone just went off the hook. Like we still had the house phone, like mobile phones. I'm not even sure that Mum or Dad had a mobile phone. So the house phone just went off the hook, and people were running in the house. By the end of the night, I think we would have had over 100 people at the house. I got thrown in the pool, fully closed in the backyard, and I think there were people really drunk that night at the house. It was a bloody good night, but they're very unexpected.
Thrown in the pool in the middle of the night, that would have been a good introduction to going down to Moorabbin and the cold showers and everything there. That apparently never was warm water. So how was the getting to Moorabbin for the first time and soaking in, and how did you feel walking in there?
Just scared. Talk about cold showers. It's funny because I was the youngest. I was waiting in the showers one of the first times, and it's pretty daunting. You're about to shower with Stewie Lowe or Spider Everett or one of these guys, and you've never met them. You've watched them on TV, and all of a sudden you've met them, and now you're expected to have a shower with them. And so I figured, well, you've got to get naked because if you don't, well, they're just going to grill you and they're going to give you a lot of grief. So I did that, but then I didn't realise that there was a pretty severe pecking order, and I was well and truly at the bottom of the pecking order. And we had cold showers after about, I reckon maybe 8 or 10 blokes got a shower, and then they went cold. And I'd wait, and each senior player would walk past me, and they'd get to the shower first. And by the end, I'd have a cold shower because that's how it was. And I was the youngest, so you just had to take your lot in life and cop a cold shower. But the first day was scary. I remember turning up to training. I was in school uniform because I'd been at school that day. I was doing year 11 at St Bede's and turned up to training in school uniform. And the boys gave me that much grief that from word go, they knew who I was because I was the kid who turned up in school uniform to go to their first AFL training session.
Like the Angus Young routine for band practice. But obviously 99, the club started well and then obviously faded. You would debut in 2000 in round 4 in a game that we got absolutely hammered in at the MCG by Melbourne. But you would win a game that year. We'd only win 2 games that year, but you'd play in one of those, which was the week that Tim Watson announced his resignation. Can you sort of take us through 2000 when you got a bit of a look in and I guess what that was like having a coach quit in the middle of the year and obviously see out the rest of that season?
Yeah, it was strange. It was just unusual because the club had been so successful for 97, 98, and then really the start of 99, we were playing really well. And then we had a game at we had a game against Hawthorn at Waverley where we were 10 goals up at half-time, or give or take. And we were flying. Tony Brown had 20-odd possessions to half-time. And apparently in the coach's box they were laughing. And second half, we've come out and got rolled. And I think Hawthorn did the walk off the ground arm in arm, maybe, that game, which was pretty famous at the time. And I didn't play that game, but from all reports, the coaches were just having a laugh in the coach box. Tony Brown ended up on the bench. So for a bloke to have had 22 touches in a half and then end up on the bench in the second half was just, there were some unusual things happening. And so that, it was sort of hard for me to comprehend because it was all new to me. And I didn't really have anything to compare it to. I thought, well, this is AFL footy, this is how it is. And training was unusual. We were getting smacked, and then we'd go to training and just get flogged. Like, I'm talking full floggings at 5, 6 in the morning and carrying dumbbells, carrying each other, full wrestling, full one-on-one games. Tim Watson's philosophy was that if we weren't going to try on match day, we were definitely going to try during the week. So we would just get hammered during the week. And but it was funny because on the weekends we'd play and then we'd all go and get drunk. And it was just a really strange culture that everyone we drank a lot of grog. And I remember thinking, is this really AFL footy? Like we seem to go out a lot. And it was just the era when people would just, you'd play and then you'd go and drink. And Transformers was still up and running, Wild Bills. And I think we were seen there more frequently than we were seen at games. But I debuted round 4 and actually played all right. And after the game, Tim Watson had 4 names on the board. My name was 1. And then the next week he came up to me and said, we're going to drop you. And that was pretty deflating because I thought, well, if you put my name up as one of the positives after we've been beaten by 14 goals or whatever we've been beaten by, why would I then be dropped the week after? And I think in today's game they wouldn't do that. They'd play a young guy for one game and they'd probably give him a couple of opportunities. And it was just a strange thing. And then he decided that we needed to go with a more experienced team against Richmond. I think it was the next week, and I think we got rolled. But, it was strange times. But, certainly playing your first game was unbelievable. I think your feet don't touch the ground. You run on the MCG to play an AFL game, and it's surreal.
I think we were 63 points up a couple of minutes into the second quarter of that game against Hawthorn. We had Tony Brown on the show about a month or so ago, and he kind of spoke about that feeling of the momentum turning and not being able to do anything about it when you're on the field. And it's just that was a really good chat, actually. But I guess you mentioned coming to the club and there being that really well-defined kind of pecking order. You were, or the pick that the club used on you in the draft was actually traded as part of the Matty Lappin to Carlton deal. And he was a pretty popular member of the club and the playing team at that time. What was through that period under Tim, there's been a lot of, talk and rumours around the playing group being fractured and that sort of stuff. What was it like as a young kid coming in and trying to, get your feet in that type of team environment?
I don't know if I wouldn't say it was a fracture. I think that everyone tried. Like we trained. Training, I remember being bloody hard, and I remember Harves, Lowy, Berkey, these guys just being animals on the track, and serious seriously fit guys who trained exceptionally hard. So I don't think anyone was fractured. I know Matty Lappin was a popular guy at the club, and I don't think there was ever a thought of me replacing him. And I'm not suggesting you're suggesting that, but it was just, I don't know, it just something wasn't right because we had enough talent, and we had the Wakelands, we had Spider, we had blokes still playing really good footy. I mean, Harves had just come off back-to-back Brownlows and was the best player in the comp. So we had some genuine stars, and Jason Heatley was still kicking goals at full forward. But it was just strange. It was, and I guess my draft year, Lenny Hayes was in my draft, Steve Baker. They both ended up being club legends, really. Well, Lenny particularly. Bates was a different type of player, but still played over 200 games, won at best and fairest. So to get that out of a draft crop, it was a pretty successful draft. They got James Begley, who ended up playing a few games and went back to Adelaide. Certainly when we came in, there was no thought of it being fractured and the players being upset that Stan being given the flick. I think, if anything, there were just stories about Stan's unusual coaching methods. But we're happy to get Tim, and Tim was a legend of the game. So I think everyone just thought it was just going to be a natural thing for him to go into coaching, and as it turned out, it wasn't.
So Tim leaves, and then Malcolm comes along and brings along Hamill, Gehrig, Stephen Lawrence, just to name a few of them, and then drafted Revolt, Kaczynski. The team virtually completely changed if you look at it that way. We know it didn't go too well. You managed to get 4 games under Malcolm. How was the experience being coached by him? Was just completely different to anyone else you've ever had?
Well, he wasn't there. So it was just one of the most unusual things I've ever seen. We went from training a lot to he got appointed, and we did 3 days a week. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we did training at Monash in Clayton. So we drive out there in the morning and do weights on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we drive back in the afternoon and do running. And the running was brutal. Like, it was just brutal running. Like five 1Ks was his thing. So we'd just work our way up to doing 5 1Ks on 7 minutes, and you had to average a time, and then you had to get close to that average every time, and it was bloody hard. But he wasn't there. So we used to joke that he was in a tree watching from a distance, or that someone was there. Like, it was literally a joke. We were full-time footballers, and we're training 3 days a week. So it wasn't really a shock when we came around to playing, and somehow we won the first game of the year. Then we played the Bulldogs and won. And everyone thought, Blighty's just the Messiah. Like, he doesn't even need to come to training, and we're winning games. And it quickly unravelled. I remember the funny story. I remember going into his office, and we had to go in for a review. And we'd heard all these stories about Blighty, and you walk into a dark room and he's standing on a ladder just abusing the crap out of the Adelaide players. And they're true stories. And so I went into his office one day, and he sat down and opened up. He didn't have a pen in his office, didn't have a bit of paper to write on. He had a landline phone and 2 books, and the books were AFL yearbooks, and they had every player in the competition in there. So I walked in, and I'm shocked that he knew my name, but he did. And he said, Troy, you play a bit like... And he opened up the yearbook to Richmond, which was just a random team. And he goes, you play a bit like Greg Tivendale. He goes, well, even Mark Chaffee, you play a little bit like him, don't you? And I went, I don't know, do I? And he goes, yeah, I think you do. And that was it. That was the meeting. That was the feedback about how I was going as a footballer in a professional era. And I walked out going, what was that? Like, I had no idea. And it was just a complete farce. And really, I mean, he defends himself on radio now and on TV, but he cannot wholeheartedly look himself in the mirror and say that he was committed to the club. And we were just lucky that Grant took over when he did and harnessed a playing group where there was a bit of talent, and then quickly drafted Lee Montagna, Nick Del Santo, Matt Maguire, Xavier Clark, and it just turned the place around. And then Luke Ball, I think, might have been in that draft as well. So, Malcolm Blighty was just really, if I saw him down the street, he wouldn't know who I am. There's no way, no.
The funny thing is, even though I don't see a direct comparison, when you said he opened the page to Richmond, I said he's going to say Greg Tivendale. I don't know why, but it just came that way. But when it's 2002, obviously, with Grant starting that year with his journey, we got to, and you were playing regularly at that point. You played 20 games that season, but the famous draw in round 5, you kicked a couple. I think it might have been the only 2 goals we kicked in the first half, I think, in that game. It ended up being an epic draw. Can you sort of take us through that? A bizarre tactical game, but we had about 1,000 players out injured, and you seem to sort of harness a bit of belief out of that.
It was pretty amazing. Grant had a really good rapport with the players, and he just sold us a vision of how we're going to play, and we're just going to defend. And we really had, we were decimated, and no one gave us a show. And we should have won. Daniel Wolf hit the post in the dying seconds, and if he kicks the goal, we win. And for us to have won that game, like even a draw felt like a win because we played so much better than them on the night. And I think I remember I kicked the first 2 goals of the game that night, and then it was just a dour struggle. But we just had this belief, and we had this young group that was starting to, we hadn't done anything at that point. I think we finished near the bottom again that year, but that night was unusual. Like we just decided the wings were going to roll back. We're going to have 2 less forwards, and we were just going to try and defend and hold on. And we just went out with the belief. And the longer we're in the game and in the contest, I mean, I remember we lost, and we were all just devastated that we didn't lose, but we just the draw was unusual because they're always weird to play in. But the fact that we'd done so well and no one had given us a show, it was a really good. It was just a really good game for us to gain a bit of belief, I guess.
We've had a few of that team on this show before, and have spoken to a few of those guys. I guess, like you said at the top, probably a bit higher profile, and probably a bit more well-known type of guys, and have spoken a lot about the type of guy and the type of coach that Grant was. And we've had Grant on a couple of times as well. But what was it like playing under Grant as, I guess, one of those lesser fashionable or lesser light type players?
Look, Grant was hard. He was no doubt about it. He was hard. He loved the club. And it's funny, I'm reading the Boys Club book at the moment. If you haven't read that, you should read it. It's actually not a bad read.
It's a great story. It's a great book.
But Grant Thomas talks about being in the room with Andrew Demetrio and telling him basically where to go. And they didn't get on. And Grant was sort of like that But I think Grant genuinely sort of liked me and maybe saw a bit of me and him in terms of the way he played. And he was frustrated with me sometimes, and he constantly worked with me on little things and effort. And if I didn't give great effort, he was really disappointed, and he sort of took it personally. I remember a game at the SCG. We're walking in the change rooms, and we've been beaten, and I think it was when we won 9 in a row or 10 in a row. We won 10 in a row at the start of 04.
Yeah,
and it must have been around 11. We played Sydney, and we famously went and watched a movie, which was called
Day After Tomorrow.
Day After Tomorrow. Yeah. Anyway, shocking movie. But we went and watched a movie, and then we lost. And I remember after the game, he hip and shouldered me and walking through the rooms. And I thought to myself, that's weird. And he apologised to me. And he also got Heath Black after that game as well. And he lined him up and hip and shouldered him. And he apologised to me, but he didn't apologise to Heath. But he was like that. It was just how it was. He was volatile. He could give a great spray, but at the same time, he was the first to nurture us and cuddle us. And we'd go back to his house. We'd have dinner. Like on the drop of a hat, he'd have 45 guys at his house having dinner. And going from Tim and Malcolm, where I remember joking to Tim in my first year, and I shouldn't have done it, but I was young and silly, and he was mentioning something about watching the Super Bowl all together, and I just said off the top of my head, I said, well, why don't we go to your joint, Tim? And Tim turned around to me and said, mate, if you turn up to my house, Troy, you'll be sent on a train back to Dingley. And I'm like, oh, right, well, we're not welcome at your house then. But then going to Grant, who was just open door policy. Like I really felt with Grant that if I had a problem at 3 a.m, I could have knocked on his door and he would have got up and made a cup of tea or a coffee and we would have sat down and talked about it. And that's I think, how most of the players felt with him.
Yes, but he had some very interesting coaching methods or just team methods, I guess. He had the first to really go with the overseas travel as a group, the rotating captain, the leadership group. He sort of brought those in. But one of the things a lot of people still wonder these days is did he hate ruckman that much?
Yeah, I don't know. I always used to joke the air was different once you got over 6'5", so they're all a bit special ruckman. I mean, look, we tried to get Dean Cox, I think, in 03 or 04, and imagine our team if we had got him.
End of 04.
So you look at that, and you think, well, if we had him in 05 and we lost a prelim, and you'd argue that with him in that team, yeah, he's all Australian ruckman. So I don't think he underrated him. I think he rated him really highly, but there was only a few in the comp that he rated really highly. So he put me in the ruck against Sandlands one game because we had no ruckman. Everyone was injured. And he goes, "You're going to ruck this week." And I remember rucking against Sandlands at the centre bounce. I'm looking up at this giant just going, I'm 6'3". How am I going to get up anywhere near this guy? But he said, "Mate, just jump up and punch his arm." And the midfielders just get to his feet because the ball's not going to be hit anywhere if you punch his arm at the right time. So I don't think he didn't rate ruckman. I think he really did rate ruckman, but he only rated the really good ones. And really, when you look at it now, there's still only a few really good ruckmen in the comp. Some clubs have got a ruckman that really, they're not that great. They just have a ruckman because you're meant to have a ruckman.
A lot of ruckmen are great journeymen. You get a lot of ruckmen that play for 9 years at 4 clubs and play 53 games or something like that with that length of time in the system. There's plenty of them.
Well, you look at Hickey,
going around. Yeah,
look at Hickey, and Hickey would have been delisted however many times over. But he goes to Sydney this year. He's nearly 30.
Yeah,
and he starts playing his best footy. And you do start playing your best footy when you're in your late 20s and 30. So it's just that he's so big that they've just kept giving him opportunities.
Now, obviously, 02 you played a lot of games. 03 we gradually got better as a group and just missed the finals. I think won 11 games that year. 04 we win the pre-season. I think we actually had a run, if you count pre-season. We won 18 out of 19 because we won 4 of our last 5 in 03, then all the pre-season games, then the first 10. But round 6 against Brisbane. So as I understand it, you weren't originally in the team, but Aaron Hamill was a late withdrawal. You played. You had 3 kicks, and one of them the most famous of your career, and one of them the most famous probably ever by a St Kilda player in a home and away game. And I just remember from that game, personally, and I know the other guys might chime in as well, that it's the loudest roar I've ever heard, probably alongside Goddard's mark in the drawn grand final. If you watch the replay of the game, you can actually see the camera shake from the noise within the ground. But can you sort of take us through that piece of play? Because I get the feeling that everybody in the ground, when you got possession of the footy, thought you were a massive chance of kicking that.
I reckon no one in the ground gave me a chance. But the funny thing is, I wasn't meant to be playing. And then the morning of the game, I got a phone call saying that Aaron was out. I was going to play. So that's great. And I hardly played that night. I think I was on the bench it was just before rotations really came in. And so I'd spent most of the night running up and down the boundary line, keeping myself warm. So I think the only reason I kicked the ball so far was because I was so fresh. And no one else on the ground would have been able to kick it that far. But it was a strange night. I remember, it was a cracking game. It was just up and back, and it was goals, and it was, Lenny at his best, and Rui, and, all these guys were just flying, playing great footy. And they were coming off, they won 3 in a row, so they were the big dog, and we were trying to take them down. And I remember I came on the last quarter, and I didn't even know where I got put. And they just said, "You go on." So I thought, well, I'm fresh. I may as well run up and down and just try and get a bit of footy. But I remember Simon Black, I ended up on him at one point, and he went to push off me and turned around and just punched me straight in the face. And if there were cameras like there are now, he would have got weeks for it. And I remember chasing him for a minute. I don't know what I would have done if I had caught him. I couldn't fight my way out of a wet paper bag. But I remember chasing him, and he turned around to me and said, "Mate, I'm really sorry. Like I didn't mean to do it." And so I was seeing stars for a bit. And then Aussie kicked the point, and somehow I ended up on the wing. I might have been meant to have been playing wing, I'm not sure. But, somehow the kick-in came, and it went to Heath Black, and then it went Heath Black to Brett Voss, and then Brett Voss out to me. And I didn't really think anything else. I just thought, well, I may as well have a shot. And I had a shot, and luckily it went through. And as I kicked it, I thought, geez, I hope someone wasn't on 20 metres out on their own. But because I just had tunnel vision for the goal, and thankfully it went through. And yeah, the noise was ridiculous. So it was seriously the loudest noise I've ever heard in a football ground. And we just went off, and then everyone started into, we better get all the numbers back because there wasn't long to go, and we were a few points up, and the siren went, and we win the game. But yeah, it was certainly weird. And the fact that I hadn't been on the ground much, Mum had actually gone home. So Mum was in the crowd, and my dad hadn't gone to the game because Dad didn't like big crowds and couldn't be bothered with the traffic. So he goes, I'll watch it on TV at home. And it's probably the only game he missed, really, because from then on he came to every game. And so I was shattered that he wasn't there. And then Mum was in the car park driving out. She heard it on the radio. She came back in and came to the change rooms crying. I said, what are you crying about? She goes, I missed it. So it was, yeah, it was quite funny.
Yeah, I was just having a quick look. It's 17% game time, so yeah, you would have been cold up until that point. And
I was fresh.
I can say I was directly behind the kick, and as soon as it was off the boot, it was going through. It went straight. Yeah, so it was a very good kick. I knew it was through as soon as it was off the boot.
It's funny. I get so many people that come up to me even now and say that we're at the ground, and it's just it's weird because I must have a recognisable face because I haven't played for 15 or 16 years. I still get people pegging me going, I went to an appraisal the other day of a house in Sorrento, and as we were walking through the house, I saw a St Kilda jersey. And I thought, oh, that's a good sign. I might get the property here. And anyway, I thought I won't mention it because it's not my place to say, I played. And so I didn't say anything. And at the end of it, we were chatting about the house and what I think it's worth and how we're going to sell it, what method, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, can I shake your hand? I said, yeah. And he shook my hand. He goes, thanks for kicking that goal in 04, mate. And it was just one of those, like, it still happens now. My boss is Swedish. He's got no idea about football and wouldn't know one end of a football from the other. And he looked at me and goes, what's his kick? And I'm like, well, I'll show it to you one day on YouTube. I've got it saved somewhere. Yes, anyway, there you go.
I'm not sure you're giving yourself enough credit. I reckon Parker's right that when that ball landed in your hands, I reckon most St Kilda supporters in the ground thought that you were a real shot at kicking that. If anything, you were known for being able to roost the ball, and I think we all kind of thought that you were a chance there. But you mentioned Aussie's point. It's probably something that maybe doesn't get mentioned quite as much as the goal. But what were you thinking at that point? Did you see it? What did you think at the time?
No, well, I was on the other side of the ground. And so where I ended up was where I was, I think, when the ball went through. And so I didn't actually see it go through for a point or out in the full, and I didn't think anything of it at the time. They called a point, and you sort of get taught from a young age. You just play to the whistle, or you play it out. And so if it's a point, well, then you just set up for a point. So I set up for a point, and thankfully Brisbane kicked it out the other side, and then it ended up with me on my own. And look, maybe I was meant to be defending, and that's why I was on my own. But I figured that we had to win the game. We were behind, so I'd rolled up. But as you said, I had 17% game time. I was pretty fresh, and when I got it, I guess I had the fresh legs, and I could kick a footy, and that thankfully that night it came off.
Would have earned you a few beers around Moorabbin in the following weeks.
I don't think we didn't drink much after that. It was funny that era we really didn't drink. I remember going like months on end without having a drink, and it was sort of strange. We went from 99 2000 where we really drank a fair bit, and after games we'd have blokes walking off going, let's get twisted, and we'd end up at Twisted at all hours, and then recovery the next morning. And there's some funny stories about recovery. I'm not sure if I can tell them, but yeah, Stephen Baker one morning drove to recovery, and he was driving on the footpath to the King Club in his old VL Commodore. And he went home, went to bed, woke up and thought he'd missed rehab. And he'd been swimming in a pool. So, yeah, that was the sort of stuff that was going on. Like, it was just, and even Stevie Baker, who I love, like, he's just a legend and still one of my best mates. But one of the first training sessions, he got on the grog with Barry Hall in our first year. And I remember Barry trying to wake him up. Barry couldn't wake him up. And I remember Tim Watson just pulled him over the coals and just said, mate, if you think this is the way it is. And Barry Hall threw a bucket of water over him in his bed to wake him up and couldn't wake him up. He was that drunk. And so that was sort of the start of my career. So, but by 04, we really weren't drinking that much. And I remember we had a drink after we won the the Wizard Cup. But then from then, we had the week off after it. And then really after that, we really didn't drink much until we had a break again. So it was it really changed. Professionalism changed a lot, really quickly.
It's amazing, too, what Aaron was talking about before with your 17% game time. In that game, 11 players played 100% game time. That doesn't happen with anybody these days, but 11 players on the ground across both sides had 100% game time. But you'd play 17 that year, including a final against Brisbane where we got a bit of a touch-up, and 05 and 06. Thought 06 you were playing some of your best footy. You went forward, you kicked a few against Port, you were looking pretty steady. Can you sort of take us through how that came to an end? 2006 was a bit tumultuous. Grant Thomas would end up losing his job as well. And I think most St Kilda supporters, and certainly I was one, I thought you were a near certainty to get another contract during that year.
Yeah, I thought I was as well. I had a contract on the table and probably stupidly didn't sign it because it all happened quick. And I think it was quite political the way Grant was sacked. And there was a falling out of friendships, and he probably tells it differently. But I think that, the blokes that sacked him, really, he was sort of gunning for them and they were gunning for him, and they had more power than him and they could sack him. So they did. But it was certainly a strange time. I remember that we were on, 2006, I think I played 13 in a row. And I might have missed the first round, but I played a pre-season game against West Coast where Grant made me play 100% game time. And we played West Coast at full strength over there, and we took half a team. And he made me play the whole game, and I actually played really well. And after the game, he came up to me and shook my hand and said, "Mate, I can't believe you played the whole game." In that, it was like 38 degrees or something. And he didn't give me a break, and it was all about toughening me up. And it worked. I mean, I went out in the VFL the first week, didn't get picked in the AFL, which I was disappointed about, but went out in the VFL and I was clearly best on. And so they had to pick me the second week, and then, or whatever it was, second week or third week. And then I played every game. And then I did my hamstring against Hawthorn, and that was it. And from there, it was only a little hamstring, but it was every time I nearly got back to playing, every 3 weeks I'd be close to getting back and I'd do it again. And so I did that 3 times, re-injured it 3 times. And I remember sitting in the stands in 06, we were decimated with injury in Melbourne. We got us in a final at the MCG, and I was sitting in the stands watching, and I think Hamill was watching, Kazitsky. We had quite a lot of good players sitting in the stands not playing, and Melbourne got us, and the rest is history. But then Grant got the sack on the Monday, and we were on I think we're on the Mad Monday or the Tuesday, one of the two. Grant got the sack, word came back to us that he'd been sacked, and we just couldn't believe it. Like we were literally in a state of shock. And half the playing group went to his house, and the other half didn't know what to do because we were like, well, do we want to go to his house or do we not want to be seen there? Because we weren't sure who was in control. And then we went to the club the next morning, and they said, Rod Butters got up and said, we sacked Grant, and you've got to take the emotion and remove from the decision. And, we know you blokes are close with him, but it was all about this. And it just seemed weird at the time. And then Brett Voss said to him, well, what are you going to do about players in their contracts? And they hadn't thought about it. And they had no answer because Grant was doing all the contracts at the time. And they said, we'll come back to you on that. And really at the time I should have signed and just gone, you know what, I've got a 1-year offer, I'll take it, and we just move on. But I didn't sign it. And then Ross Lyon turned up, and my first training session, I wasn't the greatest long-distance runner. We did a distance run first up. I came in last. The next morning at training I was in there, and I got a message doing weights from the weights coach saying, they want to see you upstairs. And I just thought, they want to sign me up because I had a contract there. And we were just negotiating bonuses per game. And I think I had a base salary of 60 grand or something. It wasn't a lot of money in today's footy, but it was an offer, and I was happy to sign it at the 60-plus games. And then I just wanted bonuses if I played 15, 18, 20 games, that I got X amount of bonuses, which was pretty straightforward and standard. And when I walked upstairs, Ross followed me into the room. I thought, it's a bit strange that the coach is following me in to talk about my contract. And then he said, we're going to sack you. And it was pretty brutal. He walked out of the room. Kenny Sheldon had just come into the club, and he wasn't involved previously, I don't think. And they were just, it was a pretty cold discussion where it was just, we know you've been here for a while, but we're not going to go with you. We want to go with someone else. And I remember going downstairs at Moorabbin, and I was upset. I walked out to the car park, and slid around the back of the car park into the change rooms, got my locker, just grabbed my keys out of the locker, ran to my car and just drove home and left everything else at the club. And I ended up calling one of the boys and said, mate, I think I called Jason Blake. I said, Blakey, can you clean my locker out? He goes, what are you talking about? I said, mate, I need all my stuff. I've been sacked. And he goes, what? And then Lenny got home. So I was living with Lenny at the time, and Lenny was ropeable. And Lenny got home and I was sitting there. He goes, what are you doing? I said, mate, I've just been sacked. And he goes, he was like, I don't know, can I swear on this? But he just said, oh, you're fucking joking. He goes, and he couldn't believe it. He goes, they make us take pay cuts and they sack blokes like you and blah, blah, blah. And it was just one of those things that happened. But as it turned out, probably a blessing, because I ended up in Sorrento and the rest is sort of history. But Grant Thomas helped me get to Sorrento. So it was sort of funny that Grant got the sack, and then just after that, Grant called me and said, what are you going to do? And I said, mate, I don't know. I was sort of planning on playing footy for another year or two. And he goes, well, I know the bloke that owns the Sorrento Hotel. And he said, there's worse places to live than Sorrento. Why don't you go down there and have a look around and see what you think? So I ended up driving down, and I've stayed here ever since, and I'll probably never leave. It's a pretty good lifestyle.
One thing with team lists and contracts and all that sort of thing, and at one point your brother came on to the list just as a rookie. Never got to play senior football with him, which obviously would have been something you would have loved to have done, I'm sure, at some point. And he stayed on for a couple of years, then headed off to North and played seniors.
Yeah, well,
did the two of you ever go, oh, we sit down and think, well, we wish we'd one of those games at least had been in the red, white and black for the both of you?
It's funny. We played in, I think, 4 premierships together at Sorrento, and we loved those times, and it was just, it was great fun. And but we don't really sit down now and talk about AFL much at all. It's funny. I had beers with him. I probably shouldn't say we're in lockdown, but I might have snuck around to his house and had a beer on the weekend. But we just don't talk about it. It's just it's funny. It's weird that we were both on at the same time. It's unusual. And Lee Fisher's actually our cousin, and Lee's so Lee was my dad's sister's son, and so he's a first cousin. And I think at one point we were all on the list, maybe together, which I don't need to look back on, but I think we're all there at the same time, which was strange that from the one family we're all there. So it's we don't look back on it now, but it was great that he got to go to North and ended up playing 11 games, I think, and made a bit of a name for himself there.
Yes, last one from me, mate. It's a little bit of a two-parter, but your first year at St Kilda, you played in the 99 reserves grand final, and there are a couple of handy players on that Essendon list that beat us in that grand final, including Stephen Milne. And I was watching a few of those highlights of the game a little bit earlier, and you were in a few of them. Did you line up on Milne at all that day? And I guess the second part of that question is in those first few years when you were kind of in and out of the team, is that halfback, running defender type thing, you copped a bit of flack from the supporter base and I guess the footy community. What sort of impact did that have on you as a young bloke?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. I remember the 04 Wizard Cup. I don't think the supporters weren't really into me at that night, because I got booed when I got up and got my medal, which was strange. And I remember being booed, and I was like, it was just weird. And I thought, well, geez, my days might be numbered here if people don't like me. And so it was sort of strange, but that's the way fans were. And I guess everyone's got an opinion, and I guess the majority of opinion was I wasn't that great. But it was funny, the 99 grand final. They had a great team, and we'd had a good year in the twos. And I guess it reflected the fact that we probably finished poorly in the seniors, and a few senior blokes were playing in the twos, which probably improved our side. But Milne's mum was in the crowd, and she screamed out, "That's my boy! That's my boy!" And Milne's ended up being one of my best mates, but we still give him grief for that. And because the next year he turned up at training, and everyone was a bit like, "We don't like this bloke." And he just beat us in a grand final. He was just trapping the whole game, and you couldn't shut him up, and he's kicking goals out of his ass. And we quickly worked out that he did that pretty well and did it most weeks. But it was strange that he's ended up being a really close friend. And I caught up for dinner with him and Dell just before the last lockdown. There was Schneid's was in town because they were in town because he's GWS, and Blakey was there. Lee Montagna, Bakes, Milne, Farron Ray. So a few of us got together and had dinner, which was nice. But, Milne's a bad man to play against and probably a pain in the ass to train with, to be brutally honest. But good bloke to have around the club.
You'll have to have a word to Bakes for us, because I've been trying to get him on the show for a couple of years now, and he always pikes pretty late in the process. He says yes, and he goes, "Nah, I don't want to do it. Don't want to. Well, I hate media."
Well, I mean, it's not even media, really. I think you guys,
That's exactly.
It's fun. Like, I mean, I think that Bakes. It's funny. Last night, Bakes put a post on of me. I got a message off him a couple of days ago and goes, "Mate, can you send me a profile picture of yourself?" And I'm like, "You want a profile picture of me?" And so I sent him a screenshot of me in a suit, and he wrote back, "Not a screenshot, dickhead, a real one." And I'm like, "Okay, no worries." So I sent him I said, "Give me your email address." I emailed it to him. And last night it comes up in my newsfeed that he's put a post up saying, "If you're looking to buy a property on the peninsula, Troy Schwarze is your man, blah, 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 blah." I couldn't believe it. And I sent back to him, I think I sent him a message saying, "I love you, mate." And, that's the sort of stuff he does. But you need to get him on. I'll call him after this and say, "Mate, the boys are going to get you on. It's a good thing. They can have a laugh. They can ask him about driving to training and not knowing he drove and driving on the footpath." And then, there's so many funny stories with Bakes. We could literally write a book about some of the things that he used to get up to. But, not knowing who players were, like he was just the most brutal player to play the game. I would have hated to play against him. And when you look at someone like Gary Ablett Jr., never wanted to play on him because he was genuinely scared of him. He was everything you want in a teammate. And I remember Grant Thomas just loved him because he was just as tough as they come. And he'd run through a wall for his mates and played injured a lot. And it was like he had no pain. But
well, Troy, thank you very much. It's been great sharing that journey with you, obviously reflecting on some of those good times and not so good times as well. But you did leave very much a lasting legacy at the club and obviously a memory that will sit with St Kilda fans forever. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, boys. It's a pleasure to come on, and I'll send Bakes a message now saying that he's got to jump on with you guys one night, and you'll certainly get a laugh out of him. And hopefully he's had a couple of drinks before he jumps on, and he'll tell you some funny stories.
Sounds like that's inevitable. So.
So it probably is, yeah.
Thanks,
mate.
All right, guys.
Troy Schwarze, for that monster drop punt that lifted the roof off the Telstra Dome in front of 52,000 people in 2004. We look ahead to Carlton. There won't be 52,000 people at the Dome, unfortunately. This Friday night, there'll be none, as we're still obviously living in a life without crowds. But a big opportunity against a Carlton side that's clearly in a mini crisis, if you will. They've got a lot of players out injured. They will welcome Charlie Curnow back, even if they do lose, or probably lose, Harry Mackay, amongst a few others as well. Some of their midfielders a little bit down at present, but they've been competitive enough in games this year to suggest that they will remain a fairly dangerous group that we do have to respect. If we win the game, as I say, we'll be in the 8 on Friday night, subject to what happens over the course of the weekend. We have some good and bad news in the selection front. Obviously, Rowan Marshall will have served his quarantine. He's okay. Hunter Clark will come back a little earlier than expected. Tom Highmore, I think he's playing in a glove and should be okay. And Jack Higgins, who's missed the last few weeks of the back issue, will come in. But we will lose a man that's been in our best 5 over the course of the year in Jack Sinclair to a minor hammy, which will hopefully be just this week. So it's kind of the lot of the Saints at the moment. We get some good luck on the injury news, but it always comes with a disclaimer, and we lose somebody for one reason or another. But look, Carlton's outs versus their ins and our outs versus our ins is worse off for them than it is for us. So a big opportunity. Clearly, they got a touch up against North. Do they respond to that? We'll see. But, I think if you look at those changes, for us, you would think Highmore for Claverino, Higgins for maybe Kent, perhaps, and then Marshall for Hunter probably seems, Nick, the logical passage.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, you don't want to make, like I said, it was a pretty good team performance last week, so you don't want to make too many changes that you don't have to make. But obviously, those guys all mentioned are all first 22 guys, and they've got to come in if they're ready.
On Clark for Sinclair, obviously.
Clark,
Sinclair going
Clark
into
Sinclair is the one out for injury. And just on that, I mean that's a pretty impressive comeback from that injury for Hunter Clark. I mean, I think we all spoke for a few weeks after that happened that he was probably done for the year. And why would you bring him back for a year or two at the end of the season, coming off that sort of injury? You know, why would you risk it? But that's an incredible comeback. But you know, we've got to respect, for all their issues, you've got to respect Carlton. I mean, that there is the potential that they could have the Coleman medalist and the Brownlow medalist this year. Harry Mackay is likely to win the Coleman. Sam Walsh is a shot at the Brownlow. I mean, he's a very, very good player.
Yes, he is.
And potentially still underrated around the league when you compare him to some of the guys that are, you talk about for the Brownlow, and you've got the Bont and you've got Petrarca and Clayton Oliver and Ollie Wines and those guys. Sam Walsh is probably still underrated, but he's a very, very good player and he's a shot at the Brownlow, a genuine shot at the Brownlow. And I don't think a team has had the Coleman medalist and the Brownlow medalist in a team that hasn't made finals since us in '87 with Plugger.
It was the same
both
player, yeah.
the same player. So it's a slightly different situation. But, I think for one of these teams, it's season over. Both teams still have a real shot at that 8th spot. Whichever team loses this week is probably done. And I think that's a realistic view of the rest of this season. I think Carlton showed us last year that they could take us, and historically I think we've shown that we're the better team. But on their day when they play well and we don't play as well, they can beat us. And we've got to be wary of them. We've got to respect them on the day, because when they turn up, they can beat a lot of teams in this league. So they've got a lot of good players. But I'm backing us to kind of right the ship this week. I'm not sold on us playing finals. I'm not sold on us winning that 8th spot, but I think we get over the line this week. And I think guys like Steele and Crouch and Dougal Howard, and you get Rowan Marshall back. I think those guys all stepping up to get back to their kind of best football. And, some of the ins that you get in Higgins and Clark in particular bring back a bit of that class and polish that we've potentially missed, for all the effort and work rate and all that sort of stuff that we've shown over the last month. Getting those guys back to provide a bit of polish and skill and just natural talent, I think, is a huge boost to us. So I'm honest this week, but it is one that we've got to turn up and we've got to play 4 quarters of footy.
Yeah, I'm thinking you might be getting a little bit generous to Carlton. I think that loss to North last week pretty much finished them off there. I think they're going to struggle to win. I mean, they have to win all 4 and win them convincingly to make the finals. So I think they're probably shot now. So that losing to North last week it's a good sign for us in the way that they've lost a zone they should have beaten. If they were serious about making it. On the other hand, you look and go, okay, they've lost to a team they shouldn't lose to. How they come back is the next week's always a worry. You get a little bit concerned about that. You got Curnow coming back, who hasn't played for 2 years, basically 2.5 years almost. I think I heard tonight it was the last game he played was Teague's first game or something. So it was a interesting one to hear that. Memories back to Jason Cripps and similar sort of situations there. And but yeah, they're an unknown this week when you look at them. I think go back 2 years now, we hadn't towards the end of the year as well, and that became a very disappointing loss to them. A game that we sort of thought, well, we should win this game, and just couldn't get it done. So if we're serious enough, we get out there and we win. On paper, we should win. It's a matter of what we do with Walsh. Can we hold Mackay? Can we break open their back line, which they're not a big back line. That's one thing.
They do intercept well, though.
Yeah.
Wiedering is an elite.
No Doherty helps. And Mackay's likely to miss, which helps a lot. So.
Yeah. So if Max can hold a few again this week against Wiedering. He's beaten him before, so
Well,
you
Nick
win those key
Larkey took
matchups.
1,000 marks on Wiedering last week, so hopefully
Yeah,
he's a bit
Max
down
should
on
do the same.
form. Yeah.
So if you win those key matchups, you still can get back to his best and beat Walsh in the middle. If um, you hold Cripps hasn't been the best this year. You can keep him down and get to minimal output. Um, win the ruck contests because we know they're down on ruckman at the moment. So it's just win position by position by position, and the game should roll on, and you can take the win from there.
Yeah, with the relative health, I know we've been decimated by injury, and just last week we were severely depleted. But with the relative health of the two lists, we should win this game, especially given everything that's happening in the background for them and all of the stuff they're sorting through. But they have been pretty competitive in most games they played this year, with the exception of last week, which would have raised some alarm bells for them. But yeah, it's a box we have to tick. There are some big boxes to come after the game, but they don't mean anything if we don't tick this one first. So get through this and then sink your teeth into the challenges that sit in the likes of Sydney and Geelong in the following weeks, because you're going to have to get one of them. So, just get the job done, respect the opposition, find a way through, understand that they can get you, just make sure they don't, and live to fight another day, because it's a week-by-week prospect for us at the moment, and we'd love to still be alive when we reconvene next week. But enjoy Friday night. We creep closer to potentially being able to go to the footy again. Maybe, probably not the Sydney game, but maybe the Geelong and certainly the Fremantle game, you would think, looking relatively positive for some crowds in attendance. But good luck, go Saints, and hopefully win number 9.